Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. We are coming back around to the zombie apocalypse guide. I know I'd said last time it's done, but a thought did occur to me, and we are going to just revisit the subject one more time. But not perhaps in the way, well, I was going to say maybe in the perhaps not the way you think, but I'm assuming if you've read the title, you probably have an idea what I'm going to talk about, and that is dealing with the zombie apocalypse in fantasy settings. In your classic Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Rollmaster, Shadowrun, any settings that have an abundance of magic available to them, or magic available to one degree or another. Now, particularly when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons and its iterations, imitators, whatever handy things may be around, it gets to be a bit tricky because there's magic involved. There's magic involved with the world at large, with everything that's happening. It's kind of hard initially to explain how an undead plague has spread around. Well, sort of. I mean, I think World of Warcraft 3 makes a pretty good example of how that could happen with the Cult of the Damned. Spreading around the plague, the Lich King taking control of undead, raising the dead, making use of these vast swarms of tireless, relentless undead minions. And the thing is, for these fantasy settings, you have more than just zombies available. You have ghouls, ghasts, poltergeists, bodaks, so many different undead creatures, liches, dracoliches, vampires, so many different wonderful creatures that you can throw at the players that would, well, more than likely survive a zombie plague, and not only survive it, but thrive in it. The vampires will probably want to keep their own little herded communities of living people around that they could regularly drink from, use them literally like cattle and the like. But we have to come back around to the issue that there's a lot of magic available. In particular, the most troublesome is going to be characters like clerics and paladins, who do great against evil and do great against the undead. And also just the wealth of spells available to them. And this also is where we bring in the other full casting classes like druids, wizards, sorcerers. Any of these classes can pose a great deal of trouble when it comes to a survival-oriented game, a zombie apocalypse like this, where resources need to be very, very tightly controlled, measured, and utilized wisely. That gets to be less of an issue when you have a cleric who can just make a quick prayer to their god, and for every caster level, they produce 2 gallons of clean, drinkable water. And not only that, when they produce this water, it sticks around after the spell's done. They can take that water and bless it and make holy water. Incredibly effective against so many kinds of undead. It undoes everything, and that's where it's like, how did the undead even spread around and get to this point? Well, there's a couple of ways around this, depending on how you want to construct the narrative and put everything together. Number 1, the gods are dead. Or at least most of the goodly gods that are going to care enough about destroying the undead. They are dead and gone. How it happens, that's up to you, but it poses a very pivotal, catalyst-like moment for the entirety of the world. Having several gods just gone dead or just disappeared from all these planes of existence, that's pretty intense. And that severely limits the abilities of any divine spellcasters who are drawing their magic power from these deities that are now gone. They're no longer able to, essentially. So they have to find other sources. And this is where things can get interesting. Maybe they're stealing magic from the darker gods, from the gods that are still alive, and this puts them into conflict with other spellcasters that are still around, and that can be interesting, but it doesn't entirely solve the problem. But then again, you don't want it to be entirely gone, because if the player wants to play a cleric, well, I'm of the opinion you should be flexible and try to work with your players and let them. If having clerics would just mess everything up, then, all the gods are dead except for these select separate gods, and the player's cleric has to steal magic from them. Or no, that's too much. That's too complicated. You don't want any clerics in the game. Fine. If the players agree to that, great. But I do like the magic stealing idea. Stealing arcane power, faith, or whatever. How the magic divine powers that fuel a cleric's spells, stealing that from another deity, another faith, really makes things interesting. I like that idea a lot. But it's not the only option you have. The other option, and I've posed it before in other videos, or the other videos for survival games specifically, keeping a tight control on reagents, spell components, the material items that they need in order to cast their spells. Making it so that the spells are going to consume the items once they're activated and used. Fantastic. That works great. It limits the players and how much spell casting they do, and it makes them consider what they're doing. But the only problem with this is it hampers their abilities quite a bit. So it's much like with anything else. You want to have it controlled, but you need to find that right balance where the player is still able to participate and be effective, and clerics and druids have an easier time of this than, say, a wizard would, because, hey, clerics get heavy armor, they have an okay attack progression, and they have a decent amount of hit points to go with everything. Whereas wizards are just going to be squishy and fairly useless without this. So again, this is where the whole gods are dead thing kind of helps a little bit, because on the one hand, the wizards can still draw upon the arcane energies flowing through the universe. Sorcerers are able to tap into their own inborn well springs of power, whereas clerics have to find other sources in order to be able to fuel their magic. But keeping tight control of the reagents is also helpful, and maybe a combination of the two may be best. It may suit you better. But again, it's by no means the only other option. The one that I also really like, a third option here, is tie the cleric's spellcasting to their holy item, their holy symbol, whatever symbol that may be. The older, the grander, or the more higher ranked or rare the symbol is, the higher level quality of spells they can cast. Now, this produces an interesting dynamic, one that's easy to make a great deal of use of, and provides motivation not only for it provides motivation for the players, but it also provides you with motivation for how different NPC groups behave. Because if you need to have an ancient or powerful essentially artifact, like not magical artifact necessarily, but a relic of a church, a relic of a faith, in order to access higher and higher level magics, well, stealing those, taking those, claiming them from other spellcasters, from other priests, other devout members of the faithful, who need that to fuel their own spells, protect their own groups, shepherd their own flocks. Great amount of conflict available there, and it poses some real moral dilemmas to these priests who still have to uphold the moral alignment of their deity, of their church, or at least stay somewhere within the realms of it in order to keep access to their spells. Do they go and pick apart this priest, a member of their own faith no less, in order to steal, claim, or otherwise somehow obtain this particular relic from them? Or do they decide, we can make do at 4th level spells? 4th level spells are pretty good, and they're still handy, but having access to 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, or even 9th level spells, that does so much to boost a character's power and their ability to function in the game. And this one I particularly like because it's only limited by one singular item. The players can still make ready use of most of the rest of their spells, but they don't get to have quite everything, and they have to deal with these moral dilemmas and conflicts. And not only that, they have to protect themselves as well. Because if you get a holy symbol that allows you to access 6th level spells, I mean, 6th level spells are nothing to sneeze at, and that's not exactly very common magic to begin with. Having something like that handy is going to be an incredibly valuable tool for any group out there. Having that cleric available to their group is going to be pretty handy, and it gives different groups quite a bit of leverage, because say the players find some traders who have such an item in their possession, but there's no cleric with them. Well, the item does not do them any good in and of the other than the fact that they have it. The players have a cleric who could be casting 5th, 6th, or 7th level spells, but they just don't have a powerful enough holy item to channel that divine energy. This brings us to a point to where these two groups could work out some kind of a trade agreement, some kind of mutual protection deal, because obviously they're going to want to benefit from the magics of a powerful cleric like that, but neither do they just want the players to up sticks and disappear. So it's going to produce an interesting situation for the players to try to deal with or solve, because the party rogue could try to slip in there and steal it. But if this group still has this item in their possession, they're probably going to be reasonably skilled enough at keeping this item out of the hands of those who might want to take it through underhanded means. So, well, hell, we're already diving into all the different ways that this particular avenue can be used. It's incredibly useful, and I think mixing and matching these 3 options can produce an interesting dynamic and add something of a bit of tension into a setting that otherwise might be upset by the abundance of magical ability available to the different spellcasters. Limited spellcasting opponents to help keep the arcane spellcasters in line, coupled with that same limitation for clerics, but they also need to make sure that they have their holy symbol available. Same for paladins as well too. Paladins will need something, whether it's a holy symbol, a shield, their sword. Somehow it has to work in such a way that they need those items in order to access and channel their magics. I think it works incredibly well, but it's one of those things, don't blindside your players with this, because that gets to be a little bit less fun, and they'll feel like you're hobbling them out the gate for arbitrary reasons. Whereas if you talk with them a little bit about it beforehand, you don't have to give them all the details of the setting, that the undead have swarmed over the world until you start playing, but let them know, hey, this kind of a setting, magic does not quite work the way it has in other settings. Spell components are going to be consumed after you use them, or they're going to be consumed after a certain number of uses, or you have to find alternate ways of fueling your magic or being able to channel your magic. Giving them some heads up and details like that lets them know, hey, if you pick a spellcaster, you can still cast spells, but there are going to be certain limitations in place. That way, nobody's blindsided, and you can still put them in this interesting situation and see what they do with it. Hell, the idea may be intriguing enough that they actually actively jump at the chance to play a spellcaster. And what could be better than that, than a player taking a character who has to try to overcome some limitations that are the result of the world, rather than the DM just going, I mean, that is what happened, but it's not for no reason. It's not just to spite or pour a bunch of grief onto the player. It's because of the setting and the scenario you've constructed, and that is way more thoroughly engaging than just going, no. But now I think that's all I've got to say when it comes to zombie apocalypse and survival scenarios. Putting a limitation on spellcaster abilities, just some way to cap it, or just give it a little bit of a handicap there, just to keep it from being totally overpowering and breaking everything, will be very useful. And not only that, but it can create objectives and goals for the players. It produces interesting moral dilemmas for the characters to try to deal with and overcome. well, no matter which way they go with it, and it produces great moments for character interactions and character growth and development. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. You folks have yourselves a good night.